Welcome back to another episode of the Scaling Lab. Really excited today to have our Director of Post-Production, Jairet Inman. We're going to be diving into all things creative, scaling direct response, performance creative department, and all the intricacies you need to know about making ads that perform. Jairet, great to have you, man.
I'm excited. This is a great podcast to be on. I mean, this is the podcast to be listening to right now.
Well, to go ahead and kick off some questions, man, I just wanted to hear a little bit about your background before we start drilling you with hardliners.
Absolutely. I used to be a teacher, and I hated it. And so I'm like, I need to find something else to do with my life. No, there were things I absolutely loved about it, and things that, especially in the role I'm in now, have carried over. And there was a point in my career where I was like, why did I go to college? Like, what was I thinking? Why did I waste the money on that? But a lot of those things have come back around. So, like I said, studied education, but that was also as sort of the rise of YouTube was happening, democratization of video was going on. And so I was part of that first wave of people where, I could have been like a straight A student, but my friends and I were goofing around making like movies on the weekends. And so it was kind of cutting into my study time. But as a result of that, through connections that I had made during college, several of us started working in the local kind of scene. So based in Nashville, and though it isn't a super, it's not a movie town, it's not a TV town, there are a lot of opportunities, a lot of businesses that need video content. And so we all sort of branched out and started doing video content creation, which I was doing on the side as I was a teacher. So it was sort of my hobby, but was able to then leverage that, kind of grow the skill, and eventually segued from teaching into doing video production, worked on a marketing team, sort of the one-man band. Through that, started to kind of focus in and found that my strength was in post-production, and I loved the things I was able to do with content in editing. And so that sort of led me to pivot into editing. Ended up joining a company called Tube Science, where we did direct response advertising, and now I'm with TNT doing something very similar as director post-production.
Awesome, man. That actually resonates with me a lot because I was a teacher, and then I was actually teaching English. I started marketing my services online because, teachers are usually underpaid. And so I started doing marketing to market the business.
I'm glad I was on this episode just to connect with you in that way. That's awesome.
So what was the biggest mindset shift that you had to take on as you transition from teacher to editor, and then from one-man band editor to working in a bigger team? I know you mentioned a big agency, and they've got a lot of employees. So describe some of that shift.
Yeah, the content that I was creating, there was a definite shift. Whenever I was doing one-man band stuff, I was on a team that cared a lot more about the quality of those individual content pieces. And so there definitely was more of a, let's polish things, let's spend a little more time to really get it right. And whenever I segued into the direct response space, obviously volume is a huge part of that. And so there is more of an effort to do quick turns and that kind of thing. So I think there was a shift in terms of the amount of polish and the amount of work that really needed to go into getting the end result. Now, the thing that I think has been the similar throughout all of that, from education to producing videos for a publisher to doing direct response ads, is that the audience is always something that you have to keep top of mind. I even did a stint as a wedding and video or wedding videographer and editor. And in that, you're thinking about like the bride and the groom, especially the bride. Like, what is the bride going to think as she watches this? And moving into direct response, the audience has to be top of mind. How am I interacting with them? What am I communicating to them? How are they going to ultimately engage with it? And I think that was the thing that I was already in some ways doing intuitively, but learning that engagement was something you could be very intentional about. And you could even see key metrics that indicate. I think that was kind of the biggest light bulb for me. And so I know there are some people within those other spaces that are not always as mindful of the audience. Like, they're very skilled technicians, very good at what they're doing, but they aren't thinking about the audience. They themselves are the audience. And so they're like, oh, look at the cool thing I made. And that was never as much what I was interested in. It was more about, what is this doing with the person who's on the other side of the screen? And who is that person, and how can I appeal to them? So that, just being more aware and growing an awareness of that, I think, has been the biggest thing that has been continuity throughout.
Working in the wedding industry is not easy? What did you take away from that that makes you great at post-production today from your time in the wedding industry?
Audience awareness is something I will always come back to. The toughest edit that I ever worked on was for a wedding. Now I'm based in Nashville, and it was for a family that they were in the music industry. And during this recording session, so we went to the wedding, we captured everything, we got back, and I was sitting down to edit. We had not captured the sound. And it was a nightmare scenario where I then had to learn everything I could about processing audio and how can you clean it up to basically use camera audio. And I then had to sit and watch this ad or this wedding with the bride and her mother, because we communicated to them. We said, hey, there were some issues with the sound. We want you to go ahead and come in and kind of see. And you could tell, like, they still were very disappointed. Having the audience in the room with you is a completely different thing. And so seeing, like, what are the things that they loved, because there still were things where they were like, they were experiencing the moments. And so what I was able to do through the edit was kind of bring some of those things out and really help them sort of relive the day. I was able to see how they were resonating with it, and it really informed kind of decisions that I was making as an editor. But yeah, that, to me, knowing what those people are ultimately looking for and what are the things that are most important to them, I think was one of the biggest learning experiences through that.
So when you're working with editing teams, what are some of the common mistakes that you see in performance creative, especially compared to content, that you're like, okay, this happens every time and this is how we're going to overcome this?
Some of the most common mistakes that I see are where editors aren't thinking about engagement and how the audience, especially on social platforms, are ultimately going to be watching and interacting with their content. And so sometimes an editor can look at their whole edit as their baby. Like, the whole thing from beginning to end is important to them, making their best decisions and trying to do their best work across the ad. And in those scenarios, sometimes they can waste a lot of time on things that ultimately aren't important. I mean, some of our ads here can be as long as like 7 minutes, right? And if you're putting 115% into something that is 5 or 6 or 7 minutes into an ad, very small percentage of the audience is ever going to see that. And so it really is about encouraging the editors to think about where can they really shine the most and what is the most important place for them to do that. Now, a thing that I can see, especially with good editors, and this is a caution that I would give anybody who is hiring, and you're like, oh, this person looks amazing. They've worked with brands before. They've got Coke on their resume. There can be a tendency sometimes of really great editors to overdo it. And so even in those places where it's like, oh, I'm going to put 115% into this part of the ad, sometimes the ad then feels inauthentic and fake. Immediately, like, people's ad radar is going to go off and they're going to be turned off by whatever that content is. Another thing, and this is one of the things that I teach as like a fundamental skill for my editing team, is just like basic quality assurance. And that is something, especially as we have pivoted, in my career, I started out working primarily with like LA-based or other domestic editors. We pivoted to working with international teams and making sure that the team is really paying attention to like basic quality assurance can be a huge thing. And the reason for that is that it impacts your internal team substantially. If editors aren't catching problems, other team members are going to have to like bear that. It also, with clients, sometimes, they get an ad that has typos in it. Like, their opinion of us as an agency is going to change as a result of that. And then even beyond that, the audience may, see those things and it will either erode trust. Sometimes, interestingly, sometimes a mistake in an ad can actually drive engagement. And so the algorithm may like it. And it's like, oh, people are calling out the fact that there's a typo in this ad. Like, are you getting people who are going to be converted as a result of that, or are you getting people who are just kind of there for the laughs at the expense of the brand? And that's not really what you want. So yeah, those are a couple things that I see as big mistakes that you kind of have to navigate with an editing team.
Or on the theme of giving feedback when you're working with a remote team, can you provide examples of giving good feedback and giving bad feedback? Because something that I know from having worked with creative departments, at times you'll review an ad and you just feel like something's off and it's hard to kind of put your finger on it. And it might be the footage, it might be incongruence between kind of the feeling that you're trying to portray and the music track. And, there's kind of that feeling. But then other times, you're able to really put your finger on it and describe it very clearly. But then there's another person on the other side of that interprets it just slightly different. So, how do you train teams and how do you approach feedback for avoiding, or I guess I should say for like adding specificity in scenario 1 where it's just a feeling, or closing that interpretation gap for scenario 2 so that we get the best result possible?
If you are the person giving feedback, the process does need to start with you ultimately. And this is something that I have, even with our internal team, have been working on, where our editors do sometimes get briefs or get creative feedback, and it is extremely vague. And oftentimes whenever I am then looped into this process, I'll reach out to whoever gave that feedback, because sometimes, working with junior team members, working with internationals maybe who don't have as much confidence with English, there may be a hesitancy to reach out and try to get clarification. They may just be like, well, I'm going to try to figure this out. And so the first thing that I will do, though, is reach out to whoever provided that feedback, and we'll try to drill into that specificity, because I see a lot of situations where it is a feeling, and I think that's where we all start. It's like, I feel like something's off. There's something that's not quite working about this. And as the person providing feedback, it's important for you to drill into what is it that is actually spurring that. So take a step back and look at the piece as objectively as you can be. And that would be the thing. A feeling is very subjective. And so what you may be feeling about the ad, somebody else may not. Like, they especially if they edited it, turned it in, like, no, I've been living with this. It felt right whenever I submitted it to you. So that's where, if you're just like, yeah, this is just bad, and that going on a subjective feeling can often lead to feedback that is very generic and very vague. This is bad. This is not UGC enough. That's when I hear a lot, where people, I think people sometimes think that they're using a term and they're like, well, people understand what this means, right? But I'm like, that is a huge categorical piece of feedback that you're providing, where you're really wanting, it's like, no, you actually just wanted the camera to be a little shakier, or you wanted the quality of the visuals to be a little more like shot on a phone. There are things like that where, sometimes we use these big categorical terms. It's just too vague. It's too general. And so as the person giving feedback, I would encourage, look objectively at the piece. What is it that is feeling off? Are you getting distracted as you're watching it? It could mean that maybe there is a split in the eye trace, where, as you're kind of like watching the ad, text is going on down here and being animated, visual is going on up here, and you're not really following everything at once. And so that disengagement causes you to become distracted. Your subjective feeling was, man, I kind of got distracted during this. But there is an objective cause to it. It could also be, you felt bored during it. Look at the like speed of edits and also the rhythm, because it could be that the editor is just cutting everything, what we at my last agency referred to as chunk cutting. Editor may be cutting text and visual all at the same time, and it's just got this very slow staccato rhythm. And what you may want to do is introduce more of an approach with even graphics cutting, similar to an L cut or a J cut, which, to break that down, in traditional video editing for film or television, where you're not working with graphics, a lot of times the audio may continue after you cut the visual, or inversely, like, you may start the audio for a clip before you cut the video. In our space, where a lot of times you also have like text and graphics on screen, you can do the same kind of approach, where maybe you've got the same visual clip, but you're animating on new pieces of text. That change of visual is going to cause the audience to like latch onto the text then. And then whenever you change the visual later, that whatever is changing the most is going to be what grabs the audience's attention. So that's where, yeah, if you're getting bored, it may just be that the rhythm of the edit is off. And that then becomes something that you can give objective feedback about. So that would be one huge step. If you are the person who is giving feedback, try to find ways to make that more objective. Take a step back and evaluate the piece. From there, one big thing that is hugely helpful to people who are, visual creatives, is examples. And so I would encourage, if you're like, I can't quite quantify or describe what's going on, but I've seen right, and this over here is what right looks like, and I'm looking at your ad and it's wrong. Share that example of what you're looking for. And then that makes it objective. You actually have, okay, like I as an editor then, maybe as a person giving feedback, maybe you don't have a whole lot of experience with editing, or with, maybe you're not really a visual expert. And editors really should be that. And so they can see the example that you share and be like, oh, okay, yeah, I can tell the pacing is very different. I can tell the positioning of the text is very different. I can tell that, these visuals are a lot more bright. All of those kinds of things that, again, maybe for you it was a feeling. Giving an example can be a good way to get somebody to see that. And then encourage and foster a cyclical communication where it's not just, I'm not just pontificating here are things, but encourage people to ask questions, encourage people to share. So, that 2-minute Slack where you're like, hey, I don't exactly understand what you're saying here, that leads to 5 minutes of back and forth, is really worth it if it actually leads to creative that's going to perform.
I love when the editors reach out to me and ask questions. Like it makes my day because I love our editors.
Anybody's listening to this and they are in that camp, like, I hate when editors reach out to me about things. Change your perspective, change it, because editors can be huge collaborators. Yeah. If they know that you're open to it, because they'll learn if you respond to them and you're like, oh, you're wasting my time. They're not going to ask you any questions anymore. But if they know, and I have heard editors talk, Kira, specifically about you, about they love the feedback you get, they love the notes that they get, things like that. They're learning from you and they see that. And so they I think are more likely to give you better work because of the relationship that you're fostering with them.
Yeah, that I think lateral instead of hierarchical. You don't want the feedback, instead of being top down, it's collaborative. Because you said 3 super important things, and that was your third thing, if I'm summarizing correctly, that lateral versus hierarchical communication about the project. I completely agree on that producing better results. And the example you gave of Kira is,
I mean, you got the case study right here.
Yeah, exactly. But the other one you said about examples of look, I don't know. I'm a copywriter, as an example, right? I'm a copywriter. I don't really understand the visual side of this. I'm understanding that, or I guess going back to the feeling aspect of it, I have this feeling that it's not right. Here's an example of what I want to do. And because the editor is the visual expert, they're able to say, oh, okay, I see what you're saying here. Yeah, I see how this is a little bit different. And that first one that you said, I really wanted to drill down into just to make sure that we understand it correctly, because I think that's a really big insight that people might overlook. So chunk cutting, if I'm understanding it correctly, is scene is ending, text is ending. But I don't know if it's L or J. I know we're getting into technical terms there, might be a little too inside baseball, but the idea that we're maybe starting the next scene's text overlay a little bit early, or we're starting the audio a little bit early, or we're doing something that's almost hey, this shifted and it's pulling me into the next scene. That can help increase engagement. Is that right?
Absolutely. A little superpower, if you want to take your creative to the next level, be aware that you can control where your audience is looking if you make the right decisions. That is hugely powerful, and editors who understand that deliver better creative. Others in an agency, if they begin to become aware of that, they're going to have a lot better impact. If something moves, if something changes, it's the reason why if you see a little something out of the corner of your eye, you look at it, you try to find it, because we are wired to notice a change more than to stay with whatever is persisting and whatever is the same. And so visually, if you delay something, when you bring it on screen, that is going to be the thing that people look at. Now, there are other things too. I mentioned eye trace earlier. There are ways with what's moving in the frame. So if somebody points, and I think this one's pretty obvious, because sometimes if we're doing a call to action, we'll do the little bouncing buttons at the bottom that says hey, look down at the button at the bottom. The thing is, you can actually be doing that exact same kind of technique throughout your ad. If somebody looks in a direction, we tend to follow the direction that they look. So if somebody looks in a direction and you put the text right there, the audience is going to look at where that text is. Or if, again, there is something that is moving and it is moving in a direction towards something, we are going to follow that through to where they're pointing or where they're looking. So the thing that's really crazy is the amount of power, once we've grabbed attention, the amount of power that we have to actually know where a person is looking within a frame. And, you know, there's been some study on this where they'll show somebody content and kind of track where a person's looking. And you get clusters. Everybody looks at the same kinds of things. We all follow the same kinds of visual cues. We're all wired to understand and perceive visuals pretty similarly. And so as a performance marketer, if you can become more and more aware of those kinds of techniques, things like that will ultimately draw your audience's eye to where you want them to look, when you want them to look there, your creative is going to be night and day different. Like that has been one of my big superpowers in what I've done, is just being aware of that and being very intentional with the power.
Yeah, that's such a big takeaway from just chatting with you today. Just following the eye of the talent to see where to place text is something I can definitely use.
So we look at eyes, like right now, like as I'm talking to you guys, whenever I look at your frame, the first thing I look at is your eyes. So you can actually, this was something we did a lot at previous agency. We would intentionally put text over eyes because that is the first thing that somebody's going to try to look at. And it also, in a way, creates a little bit of mystery, too, with the visual. So it makes the visual a little bit more engaging, where I'm like, I usually look at eyes because I'm trying to gauge like what the person's feelings are. The eyes are so expressive. But you can, if you place text right where the eyes are, that is going to be where people are going to read your text.
I know somebody in our industry, when they start with image campaigns, when launching their first campaigns with a new brand, they always go out with face images because our eyes are wired, our brains are wired to look at eyes. So we want to make eye contact. If someone's staring at you, you know.
And faces and people. I mean, part of the reason we're all on social media to begin with is to connect with people. So,
really?
I mean, for an idea, at this point, I'm beginning to think it maybe just to be like advertised to by like AI platforms. But, the reason we're on there is because we have these social networks and we are wired. That one of my absolute, and I take no credit for this, there is a researcher they were researchers that were looking at babies and facial recognition. And they showed a series of lemur images from like a lemur troop to these babies. And based on the baby's interest, like were they interested or engaged with it or not, they realized that babies could actually identify individuals within a group. Like whenever they were shown the same picture, they knew like, oh, I've already seen that lemur. But if they were shown a new one, and so like babies in their little gooey jelly brains have the ability to perceive that. But gradually we lose that ability. However, we retain it with human faces. And so those paths in our brains get really locked in. And so we are wired because our survival is based on it. Our success is based on identifying and being able to understand other people. Can I tell when my parents are happy or when maybe they're a little upset? Maybe I need to wait and ask for a cookie later. That kind of thing. We over the course of our life, we are primarily wired to look at people, to understand people. And so, showing people within visuals is superpower. Like that is one of the most engaging ways. Now, it also, there's an interesting, similar to the lemur effect, where babies can identify different individuals. We also get very good at that. And so within your performance creative, that's why talent burns out. So where a face and a person may be super, super engaging, the next time a person sees that face, they know it's your ad. Like because we have gradually over the course of our lives, our brains have been wired to identify and understand and compute, which is another reason why like obscuring the face a little bit can be a helpful way to re-engage audience, even with historical talent, because it's like, wait, is this the person that I thought and then you show their eyes a little bit later in the ad. Well, now they've already taken a step into the ad and they're already kind of engaging with it and watching it. So there are fun games like that you can play.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because I actually, in my feed when I'm on Instagram and scrolling, like there's this creator that I think this brand has worked with too much. I don't know if like the guy just got a really good contract. This advertiser that appears in my feed, they've been working with this guy so much that I feel like maybe he's the owner or something, because he has a very distinct mustache and just like as soon as I see him, I know it's an ad and I don't even look. So that idea that, like they've just tired out that one creator as good as his creatives might be.
Yeah, they do also exhaust your creative the fastest. So that's where like
Interesting.
visual, something that is otherwise visually engaging, you may actually be able to get a little more mileage because somebody may continue to engage with it and not recognize that, oh wait, this is the same thing that I've seen before. But with people, as soon as I recognize a face, the game is up.
Yeah, yeah, it makes sense. Like if I think back to our long-term contracts that we've had with some creators and even some actors, that it doesn't last forever. You know, even the longest ones, they probably aren't even going to stretch past a year. They do multiple creatives, they do well, those creatives do well, but as soon as the market starts recognizing them as an ad talent, ad person, yeah, their performance is going to drop off for
Now,
sure.
you can give them a break and bring them back later. That's something I think with creative diversity, sometimes we think we have to just burn everything from the past and continue to find new things all the time. I think sometimes there's just a little bit of value in like letting a field sit fallow for a little bit. Give it a season where you're not always trying to like harvest from it, and you can get more benefit from it long term then, because you know, if somebody worked before, there was some reason that they worked. And so I think giving them a break, bringing them back into rotation later, you can get new successes out of that.
Yeah, maybe we can shift into experimentation too, like when our ads start to burn out. And, I'm sure this will bleed into AI, but to survive now, as a D2C brand, like you need to be experimenting constantly. So I'm just curious, like, what is your viewpoint on when to kind of play it safe in ads, especially as you're guiding your team of editors, when to experiment, what's the fine balance, and how do you create that post-production team that's taking chances, experimenting, forward thinking?
I I think one thing that's important with experimentation is that it does not just start within post. And I think it has to be a part of a bigger strategy that your entire team has. So, because you can tell editors to experiment, and they'll experiment, and sometimes it'll be great, and sometimes like you'll surface something new, and sometimes they will just waste a lot of time. I would encourage, it really needs to be part of your process of mining new creative concepts while scaling existing concepts. Like the most healthy place for your ad account to be is where you have some concepts that are working that you can scale, because it's much faster to scale and to iterate than it is to prospect and find something entirely new. But if you have some of those healthy concepts, that's where you then, it's like, okay, well, let's realize to experiment, we're going to have to spend a little more time. We may need to get somebody who has a little higher skill on this task. There are a lot of things. We may need to utilize AI tools in a way and leverage them in a way that we haven't before. And that is going to, there is inherently some risk, I think, that is associated with experimentation, where sometimes your experiment is going to go great, and sometimes you get halfway through it and you're like, okay, this actually didn't work, and we're going to have to figure out a different way to do this than what we did. And so it's important that it is part of a holistic plan that your creative team has, where you are launching scaled creative and then prospecting alongside that. Because if you get into a situation where you're just scaling all the time, you're going to burn everything out, and then you're going to be in a situation where you absolutely have to prospect, and it's a 4-alarm fire, and everybody is scrambling to try to both deliver on speed and quality and creative experimentation, and that's a nightmare. Like, nobody likes that. Sometimes we survive it because we have to, but nobody wants to be there. So if you have some healthy creative that you can be scaling, that is a situation where, okay, let's get some new concepts in. Like, let's really do smart experimentation. One of the things I find sometimes within the space of experimentation, there can be a tendency to try to chase like a trend or look at something that is very flash in the pan. And I would say with our creative, I would discourage that to a certain extent, because trends burn out lightning fast. Yeah. And so rather than that, I would look more at sort of the vibe of the ecosystem. And are there ways that you can, creators are kind of doing something a little different right now. So when everybody started using like the handheld lapel mic, that wasn't just a flash in the pan thing. That was sort of a shift in the way that native content looked. There have been similar shifts with text treatments. And so you start to notice, it's like, I'm seeing more people using that. Those are the kind of situations where, and ultimately you need creatives across the team who are aware of those things. So you need copywriters who are paying attention to the way ads are being written. And again, not just looking for like, what is the flashy trend that's going to be great this week, but then it's going to, everybody's like, oh, this is outdated a week from now. But like, what are the things that are going to be a little more persistent? Because those are things that we can then test into and develop and find, make systems around, because that's where we get the efficiency then. So you can experiment in ways that is still efficient. It's not something that we're going to do today and then tomorrow it's going to be old news and we've just wasted the time that we put into it. But finding things that actually are going to be sustainable and will kind of get you through the next season. And then you continue to look for, okay, now we're starting to notice that people are, and I'm thinking of examples that I've seen. So the movement of even like text boxes. So sometimes text will be confined within boxes.
Hormozy captions, right? Wasn't that? Yeah. So, I mean, like, actually, that was going to be my next question to follow up on what you were just talking about, is the framework that you use to identify that shift between a flash in the pan and something that's actually, like you said, that shift in the way people are doing things that's going to stick around. Because, I mean, to the point of the Hormozy thing that I gave up as an example, I still see that. So it really did kind of shift. And then there was, variations of it. It's like, oh, it's not going to have the box and it's going to be a highlighted, and it's not. Anyway,
TikTok introduced, and some of this is also platform based. As people start using platforms, they will default to whatever tools are native in that. And so sometimes you see, like the text with a bold stroke around it, colored text with a really bold outline. That was a thing that we had to shift into. The things that I would be looking for, trends tend to be very repetitive and sort of self-consumptive. Everybody is literally doing the same thing, or very, very close iterations on that. That would be a thing where I'm like, let's be aware of it. And again, maybe there will be some creators who will take hold of those things and they'll find a way to then bust it out and make it a broader kind of ecosystem trend that will be more persistent. But what I would be looking for is when you start seeing distinct pockets of social, and the more you can curate a diverse personal algorithm, which is hard to do because the algorithms have now been built to like laser focus on who you are, and so sometimes you can end up getting just a stream of exactly the same thing. But if you can curate an algorithm that doesn't exactly know who you are, so that you're getting pieces of things from Book Talk, or I'm getting random like alligator videos occasionally, or like if it's like the algorithm's like, I think you might like, I don't know what you like, and you start to see something that is like, I'm seeing this creator over here as using a similar style to what this creator is. That's where you really have like nailed, this is something that is something that we could start integrating into ads in a very natural way. And as an example of that, I have been seeing more persistent text on screen, where you may, within the context of an ad, have somebody who's talking, and so you have their captions, but maybe there is like a persistent title that sort of gives you the context of what the whole video is about, and that stays on screen a little bit more. Something I've been noticing more creators doing in different ways. I would discourage people from being too early adopters, but in kind of like the adoption curve, you want to be like, once it's gotten past the early adopters, just a little sub community that are having a laugh. Once it started to expand into like, oh no, this is finding a place outside of just this little niche. That's where you've got something that I would encourage experimenting into.
Well, I know we're coming up on time, and I think people are going to be really upset if we don't get to talking about AI. So
where do avatars fit in? How do you view avatars in talent and just the possibilities? You've been experimenting with custom avatars. We've grown so much in this department. So where do you see this going, and how do you experiment so that we are using these efficiently and in an intelligent way?
Avatars are here. We have entered the age of the AI avatar, and if you aren't using it, you are behind at this point. So we, in the last year and a half, I would say, have seen real transformation in this space, where it was very easy to identify an avatar a year and a half ago. And now, as an expert in this field, there are times where I really have to squint at it and am asking myself and look for very, very niche cues in the visual that I think most people would find it very hard to identify. The technology is here. Like, we are at a point now where it is definitely a viable tool. What I see currently is that the tool is probably best as part of an iterative and testing strategy. So it is cheaper for sure to spin up an avatar, even creating a custom one. One thing I would caution our listeners against, there are some tools that have, libraries of avatars. Some of those are based on like recordings of real people. Some of those, they have created their own internal avatars, and you can use those, but everybody is using them. So in the same way that I think in the past we have seen stock sometimes kind of burn itself out because everybody's using the same stock libraries, and so everybody's using the same 5 clips of whatever.
That same point we just made a couple minutes ago about a person's face becoming too familiar, it's an ad.
Yeah, and so then it's not even you burning out your own creative. It's like somebody else burning out your creative. I know there was and we have used some of those libraries, and we've started to notice in the comments people saying like, oh, this guy's everywhere. Like, oh, now he's doing this product. Whoa. And, I think in some of those cases, like what you're seeing is that people aren't necessarily recognizing that it's not a real person. They're thinking like, oh, this one spokesperson, this actor is doing a lot of different stuff. So I think the technology is largely there to the point of and the reason I would say that this is part of a testing strategy, and I don't know that I would call it the end-all be-all. 2 years ago, you could tell that Will Smith eating spaghetti was not real Will Smith. And today, somebody might be able to create a video that is pretty convincing, and you'd really have to, scrutinize it. Our audiences are not always necessarily going to be turned off because they scrutinize something, but they're going to be turned off just because there was a slight vibe that something was a little weird. There is something that is just a little off. And so they're not saying oh, well, this was off because I was looking at the shape of the teeth throughout the ad and I noticed that they slightly changed over the course of the video. But it's because, again, there may have been something that was slightly off in the performance, the physics of the scene. There's still those little things that a person might not be able to articulate, but that their brain is still good enough to pick up on, to be like, there's something just a little off that made me question the ad a little bit, that maybe made me question the product a little bit more than I would have. So I think it's a really great way to test language, to test concepts, to test personas. This is one of the big areas that I would encourage and that we are going to be leaning into is if you want to test the same messaging across, 10 very unique looking talent, or even give them slightly different perspectives and voices, you can do that now very easily. And then you can kind of see from that, okay, well, who really seems to be resonating with our audience? What our audience, are they looking for talent that are like them? Maybe this product is advertising to older people, and they want somebody that they connect with. They're like, oh yeah, this person lived through the same wars that I lived through. This person experienced the same things that I did. Or, are they looking for something that's aspirational? Because, I may be old, but I'm I want to feel like I did when I was young. And so maybe they actually want to see more youthful talent within ads. Gives us the opportunity to test into that. Once we have identified those kinds of things, I would encourage agencies to still have a pipeline, though, for finding, okay, well, we found this person seems to work really well. Can we find some live talent that could also give us this? Because again, live person recording it is not going to have those little tiny things that you may not consciously notice, but that your brain does. And so I would say as part of that sort of testing and scaling, it gives us the opportunity to try a lot of different things very quickly and iteratively, and then gives us through that insight that we can use to test very, very specifically and really elevate. Once you found somebody, that's where you can really refine that and get that polished to a point where oh, now we're really cranking on all cylinders.
Yeah, to the point of iteration. I love the framework of we're starting with statics to dial into messaging. From there, we can go into some AI avatars to expand on that messaging. We can test different avatars to see who resonates with our audience most. And then you take from the performance perspective, right? We're performance marketers. We want data to tell us where to go. And so we can stack all of those things into what is the most authentic, which is where you ended. A real person delivering this message in a real setting, and then it's going to cost more, but all of the data indicates the ROI is going to be there.
And,
so I love that.
One thing I will say, maybe you don't test a real person at that point, but maybe you spend the time necessary to refine the avatar and the avatar's performance to overcome some of those weaknesses. But if you do find that one avatar that really seems to be working well, then you can go ahead and spend the time to refine their performance. Because, there are weird things that sometimes these models do. There's a certain amount to which they are still black boxes. And so like every once in a while, like somebody's going to look in a weird direction. It's like, I don't know why they did that. It doesn't make sense. A real human being would never have done that, but Avatar sure did. And so you can go back in and refine those outputs and spend a little bit more time kind of getting that right. The other thing is that I think sometimes we can be overly specific about our takeaways. And so like let's say we test an avatar, we may get, and I think it would be very easy for people to think, well, like this avatar performed, let's just do things with just this avatar only and ever. Where I would say, like, think through what was it that made that avatar work, and see if there are ways that we can even iterate on that. So, is it their demographic? Could we then try different things with sort of that subclass or subgroup of people and try other close similar avatars? Is it, their voice? Let's start, if we find that, like, it seems like across the board, slightly lower registers maybe have a little more authority, and so they seem to be doing better. Okay, well, let's start using that as something to guide more of what we're doing in other places, rather than just taking the takeaway, this avatar works, that's the only thing we learned from it, like, that's a terrible lesson to learn. No, what you should be learning is, this demographic seems to really speak well to our audience, or this persona. Things about the setting that this person is in seems especially realistic or resonates with people.
Yeah, so on the idea of generating avatars, or even just like the different models that are out there, I know there's the idea out there that this model is good for X and that model is good for Y, similar to the way people talk about ChatGPT is really good for research, Claude's really good for writing, et cetera, kind of the idea that each model has one kind of core skill. Do you prescribe to that idea for image and video? And if so, what do you think are the best tools for each one of those things right now?
Yeah, I do prescribe to that idea because I've seen it with my own eyes. I want to be careful about being overly prescriptive, because that will immediately date this podcast, because inevitably one of these models will release something new. I will say one of the things that I have observed is that there are big players in this space, and there are a lot of smaller players in the space. And it can be very easy to allow some of the smaller players to take up too much of your time, when most of the bigger players they're best in class for a reason. So, when you're hearing about OpenAI's models or Google's models, like these are entities that have the resourcing to really continue to kind of push things. And in fact, a lot of the smaller players in the space are usually building on the backs of these other models. Sometimes they're even just wrappers for those other models. But if you're hearing it in a lot of places, that's really where I would encourage you to start looking, because you then have more people who are testing into it, more people who are evaluating it. I would also say these models are constantly in a state of flux, and that's not always good either. ChatGPT, I'll give as an example. This is sort of a case study that I've observed this year. Early image gen from ChatGPT was phenomenal. Like, it was night and day. Text adherence was fantastic. One of the things that we actually started doing was having editors use it even as a sort of co-pilot and assistant whenever you're doing like text layouts or trying to define styles, because it was really, really good at that early on. And I now see generations from ChatGPT that are not at the standard that they were whenever the initial models were being launched. And so that is the thing where it's like, what is good today there may be something that is better tomorrow, but it is also possible that what you're using today may actually be worse tomorrow. If you want to know what I'm currently using, I have tended to camp out a little more in Google's ecosystem, so I'm really liking their image gen in most cases. There are a few really weird things that Gemini in particular, whenever you're using like Nano Banana to modify images, if you're asking for really small changes, sometimes it will give you no change. So that happens sometimes, but overall I find it's a little better. It has specifically Gemini's image gen has fewer tells, in my opinion. So one of the big things that I've noticed, even with just generating, if you're looking to generate an avatar or a person or anything, even illustrations on ChatGPT, there tends to be a warm hue applied to everything. Sometimes it looks kind of yellow, sometimes it's kind of orangey, but and now that I have told you that, next time you scroll social media, just start looking for images, and if you're like, oh, that looks kind of warm, kind of orange, Well, that's probably because they generated it on ChatGPT. It is override. It's like M dashes. That is the visual equivalent of M dashes right now. I also VO3 is a really strong model. It also is one of the more cost efficient models. So I did pretty extensive exploration into the costs behind these models because they, despite making you seem like they're magic boxes that are free, most of them are not. But Gemini's pricing is really outstanding. I say that. I will say that if you're looking to create UGC content, it does seem like OpenAI's Sora model, Sora 2, is probably the best at that currently. For avatars, I have really liked HeyGen for your kind of like workhorse functionality. However, and this is, let me give here's a little tip if you want to make avatars that are both cost efficient but also potentially higher performing. Use Google, like VO3, to generate the hook. And then switch into HeyGen for the body. Get people's attention with the best possible avatar, and then segue into something that is going to be very functional. Again, HeyGen is very capable and tends to give pretty good results. And so you can use that in like the body of your ad, and then you get kind of the best of both worlds.
That's the sauce right there.
It's yours. It's everybody's. Now I have no more personal value. I gave it away.
And we're done. That was amazing. Yeah,
No, that's
it makes
super
so much
insightful.
sense. All right, so as we wrap, let's go big picture and put you on the spot with a prediction. What do you see as the biggest opportunity, or what we need to pay attention to as performance marketers in 2026?
Creative diversity. And I feel like this is getting to be cliche, but I was in the camp of creative diversity before Andromeda. I want to say that. Before I was there. Well, part of it, and this
that was the most hipster thing anyone said on this podcast.
Despite looking like I'm just settling into my old man phase, I am the most hipster person ever. Like I am inside, I am a hipster. So to give my bona fides on creative diversity, one of the earliest lessons I learned in this space was built around that idea. We had a brand that we were working for that had a very defined style. They were a beauty brand. Beauty brands always are like, no, we're selling aesthetics, so everything needs to be super heightened, and they tend to very restrictively define their style. And so we were using it, and we were also seeing gradually declining performance over time. Eventually, as we were like fighting with the client, trying to like get something, we pitched, hey, can we just try a text treatment change? And like, so we created this ad where all of the other creative was the same. One was using their house style. The other one was, at this time, it was more of like an Instagram style of captioning. And so we integrated that. I was the editor on this and created the ad, and we delivered it to the client. And lo and behold, the new text treatment blew up. It was huge. And so just by introducing a different text treatment, we suddenly like launched new performance. Now, the fun thing about this, the brand loved it so much, they're like, well, this is our new house style. And so they're like, this is what we're doing for everything. And so we, after a few months, started to see declining performance again. And we leaned in at that point into like a more TikTok, solid color text with a stroke, with an outline. And boom, more performance again. This eventually came full circle, and we got to a point where it was like, well, what if we tested back into their original house style that at this point they'd basically abandoned? And it got performance. So it was because we were changing things. I think there is something to be said for prizing your audience, delighting your audience even maybe a little bit, that sometimes we lose sight of, but giving people something that is new, that is unexpected. I don't know that you guys can see it right now. I'm going to pivot my camera a little bit. So this painting right here on the wall, this is my favorite painting in the world. And it was created by my son. I know it may look like a Mark Rothko painting, but let me assure you, it was a Keaton Inman original. I've gotten lots of paintings and drawings from my children over time. The reason that one really grabbed my attention was that whenever he came home, he was walking up to the door, and I met him at the door, and he was holding it like he was proud of it, and he hands it to me, and he's like, look at it, like, look at it. And I was like, buddy, this is great, this is wonderful. And as I'm looking at it, I'm like, it's all just red on a page. And so in my dad brain, I'm like, okay, well, I need to resonate and connect with like why he's so proud of this. And so I'm like, oh, what is it, buddy? Is it like a fire truck, or is it, like I'm trying to kind of guess at and get at, because I've seen, you never can tell if it's a cat or a person or whatever. I'm like, it's a thing. And he looks at me like I'm an idiot. And he says, it's red. In that moment, it became like, I'm like, this painting right here, this is the best one of all time. And it's because like, it was different. It completely like changed what I was expecting to get from this painting. It got on my wall because it really reminded me that like, we can surprise people, we can delight people. And so I would say, as you're approaching creative diversity, think of it in that way. It's not like this is some, challenge that we have to overcome. This is an opportunity for us to try new things. I would encourage, as you're looking at the next year, lean into creative diversity as a way to really delight and engage your audience.
Awesome. Man, I got 2 rapid fire closers for you. Can we do it?
Let's do it.
All right, let's go for it. So a CMO asks you, better editors, better tools, or better process? Where do they invest
Depends
first?
on where we're at, but I would start with better editors. If you already have good editors, then I may move in another direction. Better process is not going to help terrible editors. So the process question, answer might be the thing that I would give in most cases. But if you have terrible editors to start out with, you need to get those people out of there. They're a lead weight.
Yeah, absolutely, man. If you got better editors,
then you can start implementing processes,
yeah.
and then you can start giving that
exactly.
team tools. But if
Awesome.
your team is holding you back, you need to flip that.
And the second one is, what does good creative actually look like as we move into 2026?
Lean into the unexpected. Good creative is creative that does not look like all your creative before.
Excellent. Great. Well, it has been an absolute pleasure having you with us, Brett. Thanks for all the insights. I know I got a ton of value out of it. I hope our audience, our tens of listeners, get value out of it as well.
I
know we're going to have you on because
tens of thousands.
There you go. Yeah. We're going to have you back because I think we only made it through about 30% of the questions.
I'm here. I would love it. This is fun.
People are going to want more AI. People are going to want more about editing. I think there's some super big insights that we didn't even get to click into about offshoring and even more about building solid teams. As creative is king, I know people are going to want more of that. So thanks again, and we'll see you in the next one.
So much.
If you got some value out of this, make sure that you subscribe to follow along the Scaling Lab podcast as we release more episodes. Hit the bell icon so you get notified every time a new episode drops. If you have any questions, make sure to comment below. Thanks for following along, and we'll see you in the next episode.